Let's dive into a bit about certain models or certain frameworks or certain examples that you'd like to mention that you've gone through in your journey that can help schools, that can help leaders, that can help teachers, HMs, or whatever it could be. I'd love to know a little bit about what you have in mind.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So we've been very lucky to learn from so many schools that are shifting the curve for kids from low income communities. And I'll start with some of those, some of the schools and programs. I'll start with some outside of India.
For
I'll
sure.
share some that I think are actually right here
Thank
within
you.
India. Um, and then maybe just go to some of the frameworks. But, um, one of the earliest schools that I think I saw was a school called Kairos, which is actually in St. Louis, Missouri, which was incubated by our partners at the Opportunity Trust. And when you walk into this school, it's actually designed after a WeWork space.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so it looks nothing like a school,
Mm.
right? You're seeing like conference rooms. You can't find teachers in many places, right? You see kids actually working in groups. You don't see many traditional classrooms.
wow.
In fact, it took me a while to find a traditional classroom when I went in.
Okay, it's interesting.
And I went up to the founder, and I remember going up to the founder. There's a guy named Gavin, and I was like, "What are you thinking? Like, why does this school not look like a school?"
Right.
And he basically said, "Look, like, we keep hearing this criticism that by the time our kids graduate, particularly kids from low-income communities, and they get to college and they get into the workforce, one, they're dropping out,
Right.
but two is they're just really not prepared. And we keep seeing these surveys that are telling us that employers are telling us overwhelmingly that kids just aren't prepared to enter the workforce." And so we started scratching our heads and asking ourselves why. He told me, and he said, when you look at that, you come across a few realizations. And one of the most important one is that when kids enter college or kids actually enter the workforce, well, they're largely in charge of their own schedule, right? They have a lot of autonomy and they're expected to basically make decisions that are going to be good for them over time. But when you look at what happens in schools, well, it's the exact opposite of that. In fact, we actually control every minute of a child's schedule,
That's true.
right? And even within those minutes, we're usually controlling how a child is sitting, right? What the child is doing. And so we said we needed to figure out how to flip that equation. And so what they do is kids are spending more than 65% of their time actually, working independently, working in small groups, and they're spending about a third of their time in a traditional classroom.
Right.
Every week they're checking in with the mentor, right? And they're figuring out how to basically go back and self-assess whether they're on track or not.
Right.
Right. And I think like those are the kind of innovations we need to figure out how to prepare us again for a 21st and 22nd century economy. Another example is high tech high, right? Another example in the US, right? Like kids are spending 2/3 of their time, right? Just basically building solutions that are responsive for their communities. So they're building a lip balm business because they discovered that actually communities members around them actually didn't have lip balms that they were happy about.
Right.
Right? They're building other social solutions for communities around them. You come closer to India, and I think we've actually got quite a few incredible examples again, right? You've got Apsara in Pune,
Right.
which
I've heard a lot about.
yeah, I mean, you have girls all coming from low-income communities, right, that are basically entering the school at 6th grade. They're learning through the Cambridge curriculum. They're held to a bar that you don't see very often across India, regardless of income levels. And they're not just holding kids to a very high rigorous bar, they're actually preparing these girls to be the leaders of tomorrow.
Wow.
Right?
That's inspiring.
Not just that, you come to some of the schools that, are a part of the Circle Network, right? I, just 2 weeks ago came back from Kanpur, right? For a school called Sky High.
Right.
And this is basically 60 kilometers outside of Kanpur in an area called Akbarpur, right? Rural UP, right? And you actually see like kids learning in groups. You see kids pushing each other at high levels of rigor. And you see actually kids operating with a level of hunger. And you're like, wait a minute, these kids have the potential to be able to build a better India.
Right.
Just yesterday, right? I was with a program here in Bangalore where a program called Thicket Tales, right? Where actually like the kids are, spending time every week coming out of their classrooms. They're learning science and social studies, not through a textbook, but they're actually doing that through getting into the city's parks. So they're learning about the pollution across Bangalore by measuring AQI levels.
Right.
Right? They're learning about plants by actually going off and discovering trees.
Yes.
Right? And through the process, they're actually figuring out how to make science and social studies much more relevant.
Right.
They're engaging with questions like, well, how has Bangalore changed from the early 1970s to 2024? And they're looking at maps of rivers to actually see what's been built and how it's evolved.
And they enjoy that so much.
And it's building lots of relevance. It's building lots of curiosity. It's building all of the things that we
Right.
hear. And employers are saying kids need to be able to succeed in a changing economy, in a
Right.
changing world, right?
Right.
And so you've got these examples
Fantastic.
cropping up across the world. And the final one that I'll give you is, there's another example that we're incubating in Punjab, right? In a district in Gurdaspur, right? About 50 kilometers outside of Amritsar. And this school has 50% of its kids coming from low-income communities and 50% of its kids coming from middle to high-income communities.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they're actually all learning together, right?
That's fantastic.
And they're learning by basically reconnecting to land, by rediscovering the agrarian community in Punjab, but they're also learning at really high levels of academic rigor. And they're combining all of this. And so I was just there 3 weeks ago, and I was sitting surrounded by 50 parents, and you really had parents that were daily wage earners and laborers sitting next to shop owners, parents who were from banks, all coming together and all saying, actually, we believe that integration is important. And you look back at that school and you think, wait a minute, like if we want to build a more integrated India, well, then our schools need to be microcosms of a more integrated India.
That is so fantastic.
And that's very central to what we believe at the Circle, right? But it's also central to all of these models, right? We need to be asking ourselves, like, what is the India that we want to build?
Right.
And how do our schools be microcosms
Right.
of what that India could be?
Right.
And so if we want a kinder India, well, then we need to lean into kinder schools. If we want a more just India, we need to build more just schools.
Right.
If we want a more equitable India, well, then we need to build more equitable schools.
Right.
And so there are many models that are just shifting the curve. The big question we need to ask ourselves now is, how do we get this
Right.
to as many kids as possible?
Right.
Right? There are some frameworks that are out there for people that are leaning into this. We have two that we use frequently at the Circle that actually inform a lot of our thinking, and they come from two of our very close partners. One is an organization called Transcend, and they developed something called 10 Leaps. And these are actually 10 leaps that every educator should be engaging with to say, how do I actually bring kids into a 21st century world?
Right.
Right? And they start to list out these leaps that schools need to take, right? From inequitable structures to more equitable, right? To basically holding kids to mismatched expectations, to being able to hold all kids to high expectations. And the second is actually our partners at the Reinvention Lab, which have actually come up with these 5 axes that we should be reinventing on, right? Which actually leans into, well, maybe we need to be reinventing why kids are learning and what they're learning and how they're learning.
Right.
And it continues to build on how we should be thinking about reinvention. But
Right.
both of those I found to be enormously helpful.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for that.